Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He served as an Air Force pilot in Afghanistan. He's also a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, you were listening into that, and thank you for sticking around afterward. Biden sticking with his deadline. You hear the latest, really amazing, heroic effort of the military on the ground of what they've been able to pull off. 19,000 people evacuated in the last 24 hours. That's bringing the total up to 88,000 people since the beginning of this. You do not like what the president has committed to in terms of this deadline. What do you want to see happen then in the next 6 days?
Well, I think the key is just we're going to leave when we have everybody out that needs to come out. I think, the August 31st deadline is really arbitrary. If you remember, President Biden initially said they were all going to be out by September 11th, and they realized the optics of, making that a big day. So he backed it up to August 31st. So it wasn't based on any necessary, issue, except that they picked that. And so I look at this and I go, that needs to be the commitment, is we are going to leave when every American that wants to get out is out, when every Afghan civ holder that wants to get out is out. We're going to do it as quickly as we can. It'd be great if we could hit August 31st, but we're not going to be kowtowed to what the Taliban want us to do. By the way, the ISIS threat doesn't necessarily increase after August 31st. It is a persistent and real threat. But, we have a commitment to make. And our military, by the way, is fully capable of, really doing good stuff like this and also defending these people as well.
There was an important question from a reporter in this briefing who asked about vulnerable Afghans who are afraid for their lives under Taliban rule. Though they are not the SIV applicants, they're not P1, they're not P2, they're not, in the line that the administration has been talking about that they're focused on so far. And she said, what should they do? Kirby didn't have a good answer, Congressman, and I'm wondering if that's because there is a harsh reality to this right now. Many Afghan allies who the United States aims to help will be left behind. Administration officials is actually now beginning to acknowledge that. Do you agree with that? I mean, is that the sad reality of what happens when you lose the war? You can't save everyone.
Yeah, it is true. And, the sad, I'm getting inundated with people, some that are Afghan civ holders that we're trying to get out, some that are green card holders, and then some that are like family of folks. And, there's no category for them. They're stuck. And this is why I was such a strong advocate for saying, there is a reason we need to stay in Afghanistan and not leave in the first place, because the endless war that, people like Rand Paul and stuff keep talking about, the endless war is not the U.S., partnering with Afghanistan. The endless war is the war that has been declared against us by these radicals and by these that would attack women and would take away rights. And so, look, unfortunately, we are where we are. And I think the reality is without U.S. troops there, with a date certain to end, there's unfortunately going to be a lot more tragedy that comes out after the last U.S. troop leaves. And I'm heartbroken about it. But I think it's a reality.
Look, the Taliban are now saying that no Afghans can leave the country. You heard John Kirby say they expect that Afghans are still making it through and expect that to continue. But the quote from the Taliban is, we're not going to allow that. And there is also, I think, extremely important reporting that has been coming out that the Taliban today telling women to stay home from work because Taliban soldiers, quote, keep changing and are not trained. Essentially, that women cannot be safe in leaving their houses right now. They say that is a temporary measure, this coming from the Taliban. But at this point, in this moment, if that is what they're laying out, what should the U.S. reaction be to it?
Well, look, I personally think on the withdrawal process, we should say we're going to leave when the last person's out. Taliban knows darn well they can't beat us on the battlefield, and not that he wants to go to a shooting war again. But they've been on the receiving end of 20 years of American military power and have lost every single one of those battles. Where they finally defeated the United States wasn't in battle, it was in our will, because we said 20 years is too long, even though it took the United States many, many decades, if not centuries, to get our act together. But what you're seeing with the Taliban, it's not a protective measure. This is what the Taliban are. They try this kind of temporary charm offensive, but we're seeing the reality of it. Women are going to be brutalized under this regime, and it's sad and it's awful. And by the way, I got to say, I've been in briefings. We were in a classified briefing yesterday. I've seen the ones we just saw on television. what they're briefing is very different than the reality we're hearing on the ground. I'm getting inundated with people that are saying they're at the gate getting turned away. They have valid paperwork. They don't know why. I think in hindsight, we'll see what all went down, but I think it's important to note this is not a smooth process where everybody with paperwork is getting through the airport now. There is a lot of misinformation we're hearing.
Does that get to the contingency planning part of this? We heard from Kirby saying that they are in the process of coming up with contingency plans, as President Biden has requested. My question is it clear to you, and as much as you can say, what would trigger the president to change course? Would trigger these contingency plans?
Oh, I have no clue what would trigger them. One of the things I'm thinking is happening, I'm actually a little concerned about. We should prioritize Americans out of Afghanistan, absolutely. But once Americans are out, that gives the impetus then to leave the Afghan civs that we haven't by August 31st behind. That's what I'm concerned about, is that, we're going to end up saying, well, we got all the Americans out. I did a great job in doing that. But in terms of the contingency, I'm sure if the Taliban decided to attack us, there would be a contingency, but I don't know what it is beyond that.
On just the basic fact of what the options were, isn't an evac like this always going to be messy? I mean, they could have planned better. But do you acknowledge that, especially when you've got the threat of ISIS now very real, very persistent, that the Taliban control Kabul, that the groundwork was laid by the Trump administration for this clash to see the Taliban gain strength? Wasn't this evacuation, do you think this evacuation was always going to be messy no matter what?
Not this messy. I think there was always going to be a mess. And again, you said it right. About a year and a half ago, the last administration started laying the groundwork for saying the war wasn't worth it as they were negotiating with the Taliban. But the issue in the execution came, we abandoned overnight Bagram Air Base, a massive air base that we had well defended, had been the U.S. base since we'd been there for some reason. I think that should have been the last thing we left. Also, when you saw the Afghan army collapsing, which, by the way, when you lose your air power and you lose your logistics support, militaries collapse. But when they saw that happening, there was no rush to rush troops in, re-secure Bagram or secure Kabul airport, recognizing the eventuality of what was going to happen. That didn't happen until about a day or two prior to us even leaving the embassy. We talk about having this over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability now in Afghanistan. That is gone as well. So, the cost of this is massive. And not having seen it happen, I think there's got to be real investigations as to why and how that can be corrected if it ever happens.
Well, even before and after action report, I know you have to go, and I'm sorry, we're hard up against that timing. Can I just ask you, you said there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation that is out there. Do you really think that, disinformation often, it indicates that you think they're lying to the American people. Do you think that the Pentagon is lying to the American people about what's happening, or is this just part of the mess?
Yeah, no, I don't think they're lying. I think, look, it's a matter of you've got to put a decent spin on it. You don't want to create panic, right? People in Washington, D.C. don't necessarily know everything that's happening on the ground, and we're getting information that's happening in other areas. So I guess if I use misinformation, given kind of the role of misinformation lately, that's probably a little more intense than I meant. But the reality is the situation we're hearing from folks on the ground is far different. But I got to tell you, as we open this up too, the U.S. military, as always, is doing amazing, executing flawlessly. And I can't imagine being one of those U.S. Marines on the wall, watching the Taliban beating women or, shoving children around and knowing you can't do anything about it. That's going to have a special psychological impact on some of our brave Marines.
Congressman, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Anytime.